Okay, last lecture here in this chapter, and I just want to basically what this is a list of things that over the next several chapters or lectures that we will basically dig into some of these aspects, and it's just sort of a summary of the cellular context of development. So as we think about the way in which an embryo is going to build this, well, actually we started the zygote and we're going to build this embryo and eventually build the organism, and that thing's going to have its tissues, its organs, and so on, and give them those normal shapes. There are several things that cells are doing during this time that we're going to have to focus in on and understand that this is what they're doing. So some of these we've sort of already talked about when we talked about those principles. Certainly growth and division are going to be an important thing, so you and I will go through some mitosis and meiosis aspects, not so much the processes themselves, but how it's controlled. And we'll talk about some cell shapes. So what role does the cytoskeleton play in that? What role does the plasma membrane play in that? Those kinds of things. Obviously, you guys hopefully are familiar with these terms, genotype and phenotype, where the genes you have are going to give rise to those features, those characteristics that you have. And since your genes control that phenotype, basically what you look like and the things you can do, obviously you can change, either on short-term or long-term basis, the kinds of things you're doing basically by turning your genes on and off. We'll see a lot of aspects where the cells may have to move to get to where they need to be to do their job, and I've already mentioned this a couple of times throughout the last few lectures. There's a possibility that the cell might actually have to die as part of its normal role in the embryo. So a good example of that would be, remember when we compared the mouse limb to the bat limb, and the bats obviously maintain that webbing. Well, what actually happens is that the mice have that webbing as well. Let's see if I can go back here. And early on, you'll notice that the webbing is there for mice, but early on that webbing starts to die off, and as development takes place, and here kind of the fingers are a little curled a little bit, so it's not that they got shorter, but that webbing is dying off within the different fingers there, whereas in the bat they would not be. So death is actually going to be a very important part to this process. Cells have to respond not just to the conditions around them, but they're also going to have to communicate with each other and respond to the things that are taking place around them. Who am I touching? What kind of hormones or what kind of molecules have just been released? Where am I? What is my location? Am I ready to do the next step? So all of these things are things that cells need to be thinking about in the processes that they're unfolding. So obviously, when we started this chapter, we talked about the focus of this class and the fact it's looking at the embryogenesis and how we build that embryo out of the zygote. But obviously, we can't do any of that without answering some of these questions. What does the cell look like? And how does it work? How do they interact? Because all three of those are going to be very important in allowing one cell to create a bunch of different cells, and then that bunch of different cells to do completely different things. And what's really neat about this is, if you think about it, every single one of those cells that came from the zygote has exactly the same genetic information in it. So for us, every cell in my body has the same 46 chromosomes that half came from my mom, half came from my dad. They were in the zygote that became me, and somehow within the context of building the embryo and through my childhood and adolescence, right, we build these organs that have cells in them that are completely different functionally and structurally from each other, even though they're actually using the same types of genes, or the genetic information that's in them is exactly the same. So that's one big question we're going to answer. How do cells that have exactly the same genetics in them give rise to completely different phenotypes, even in the same organism? Okay, so a lot of neat stuff that we'll talk about, and once we get through that stuff, we will build some gametes, our sperm and the egg, and then we'll do some fertilization, and the rest of the course will be looking at how the embryo unfolds after that. Okay, so that's it for the chapter 1 material, and next time we will start chapter 2. Bye.